Afternoon all, I'd like to show you an amazing game of Alexander Alekhine played in the Nottingham tournament of 1936 in round 11 against Colonel Hugh O'Donnell Alexander. He was quite a strong player, Alexander. He was British champion in 1938, that's 2 years after this game, and 1956. During the Second World War, he worked at Bletchley Park with Harry Glombeck and Sir Philip Stuart Milner Barry, deciphering German Enigma codes, and later for the Foreign Office. His best result was second equal at Hastings 1937 to 38, so that's the next year after this game, where he tied with Paul Kaz and Samuel Rzewski ahead of Floor and Fine. He held Mikhail Botvinnik +1, -1 in the 1946 Anglo-Soviet radio match, and represented England on 6 Olympiad teams. He was also an author of note. So let's have a look how he played with black against the mighty world champion Alexander Alekhine. So d4 from Alexander Alekhine, knight f6, we see c4, e6. Now knight f3, avoiding the main Nimzo Indian, but black plays bishop b4 check anyway. It's a disruptive check. Knight bd2, and we see b6. This is all pretty standard Queen's Indian territory. In this position, the most popular move is bishop a6. Also bishop b7 is quite popular, which was played. Bishop g2, black castled. So far so good for both sides, but here is the first slight questionable move actually from black. Black actually voluntarily gave up the dart squared bishop with bishop takes d2, and this game is actually kind of a model game for how this can really backfire. There's no real concession, for white, like double pawns or anything. So white plays queen takes d2, and we'll put on a Kibitzer here, and white's got a small nagging advantage basically after this, a positional advantage. But how does he want to celebrate the bishop? By taking with the queen, the bishop's still preparing a quick fianchetto to put pressure along this diagonal. So how critical will this be? Let's find out. d6, b3, the bishop prepares for that fianchetto. Knight bd7, bishop b2, and then this next move reveals that black is concerned about this unprotected piece on b7 and plays rook b8. You might wonder, this is a curious move. Well, we get the insight from Alexander Alekhine's notes, who actually has some interesting notes for this game, that black's intention may have been to play a move like knight e4, but without any potential later for knight g5s, which might expose the bishop on b7 in a particular variations coming up. So protecting the bishop is generally a good idea, you could argue from that point of view, but there might have been better ways to achieve this. Alexander Alekhine's comment actually was instead to play something like queen e7. So if queen e7, it has kind of the same idea, but combined with rook ad8 and bishop a8, and black would be better mobilized. So he's still making this piece to be protected, to remove that unprotected piece, and then can still later play for knight e4, so it would have some extra bonuses that the rooks are slightly better there. But no, so rook b8, a bit of a curious move, and we see now against black's knight e4 and f5 plan this idea of rook ad1. So maybe black might have thought by giving up the bishop earlier he's got extra control of e4. Is that really enough to plant a knight on e4? Well, we're going to see something very, very interesting now. Queen e3, and this knight is slightly vulnerable for d5, which can actually extend the scope of the bishop. It's protected now, and this is a very interesting part of the game now, where white does exploit the bishop pair and plays a move which seems a little bit risky. I wonder if you could find this move in this position if I gave you 10 seconds starting from now. It's a very, very powerful move, and the engines really like it as well. Okay, it's the move d5. Now you might think, d5, surely this allows the bishop to be blocked. Well, let's try. If e5 blocking the bishop, white has knight h4, and with a horrible threat of knight takes f5. And what does actually black do about this? Is actually losing a pawn here. There's no way of protecting f5 and the e4 knight, so this is actually constitutes quite a dubious, potentially a dubious pawn sacrifice. But hold on, you might say knight ec5. Well, white's still a little bit better here with f4 now, and f5 is under scrutiny. What does black do here? It gets a little bit tricky. Okay, black's avoiding the pawn loss, but the knight's being kicked. There's pressure on e5. f5's potentially under fire. If a move like g6, this isn't that great for black, this kind of variation. So e5 in a nutshell isn't that desirable here, and it would seem more desirable to try and show that the d5 pawn is a little bit weak. We see e takes d5, c takes, and now is this d5 a little bit vulnerable? Because after all, this knight is also shutting out this bishop on this diagonal. It's only the rook holding the d5 pawn, or is it? After knight df6, this is another fantastic move now from white. What would you play here with white to resolve the d5 issue? If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Okay, just simply knight h4. It's not really a problem here. If knight takes d5, white has rook takes d5, bishop takes, and now double attack on that loose piece, ng7. So this bishop is showing its power on the diagonal in this variation. And also there are some problems now. White is also potentially just taking on f5 next. Black plays queen d7. What else was there to consider? Let's see, if bishop takes d5, then it's the same thing, or is it? No, if rook takes d5, we can always switch the rook back. But here, in fact, the move bishop takes f6 would reveal the power of this bishop on d5. So if knight takes, we just do bishop takes d5, winning a piece. So it doesn't matter what way that's taken, it's not able to be taken, that pawn. So that's why queen d7, just holding up f5 for a moment. But now bishop h3, and this is where it gets quite amusing again. So why isn't, because the queen's now protecting g7, and you might think, isn't knight takes d5 renewed as a threat? Let's have a look here. If knight takes d5, can you see what white can play here? If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Okay, it's not to do with g7, that's protected, it's just queen takes e4 simply, that horrible pin. So again, d5 is not a problem. So we see now a horrible concession. Given that white's got this huge trump card and black hasn't got an opposing bishop, black didn't try and shut down the bishop. Maybe that was one of the better ideas to have played e5, but this bishop's gazing on that diagonal. And the last thing black positionally wants to do is make that bishop even more painful. But how is f5 protected? How? There's only g6, and it does weaken that diagonal. Now we see f3, the knight's kicked back, it goes to c5, and now a very nifty move, just queen g5 here. And again, d5 is slightly irrelevant. There's numerous threats. If knight takes d5, now we have knight takes g6. Look at that raking bishop down there. Now this would be horrendous. This would be a mate. Next move off to queen g7. So that's unpalatable, this position. If knight e6 here, there's actually knight takes f8, winning black's queen and the rook. So that's unacceptable as well. So d5 is again, it can't be taken basically. Black now plays queen G7, F6 was under fire from the bishop and knight, so it's just protected like that. And now we see B4 kicking this C5 knight. The knight goes back to D7, and now again a really powerful move, putting loads of pressure on black's position. E4, look at the pressure here on this diagonal. What's going on here? Well, let's see. If F takes E4, bishop E6 check, and bishop takes D7, the check is slightly more accurate than just taking on D7 immediately. And look, F6 is dropping. We've got a horrendous pin here with check. So that's just completely lost to take that. What can black actually do? Well, he tries what appears to be quite a resourceful trick. Black tries knight takes E4. So he's actually attacking the queen and revealing an attack on this unprotected piece. So, in this position, if bishop takes G7, which wasn't played, then actually black's okay. Knight takes here, bishop takes, knight takes H3, king G2, rook takes F8, and black is fine. Look at this. And D5 is weak at the end of that. So that would show D5 to be weak. But no, white has a much stronger move here. Can you guess what white plays in this position? Very simple, very strong. If I give you 10 seconds here, starting from now. Okay? Just queen c1. Just make it a pawn sack for that diagonal. And you might think, why? Why do this? What does this gain? Well, let's see. The knight goes back and the point is revealed. Now, a really crushing blow in the position is available now, in this particular position. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, can you find this really crushing blow here? Okay, bishop takes F5. Wow, what is going on here, you might ask? Well, black didn't take this bishop. If he takes the bishop, knight takes F5. Where does the queen go? If she goes to G6, then knight E7 wins the queen. If the queen goes to F7, then again knight H6 check wins the queen. Where can the queen go? If queen H8, then knight H6. King G7, Queen G5 is mate. So that's not palatable, this position. The queen is lost here. So black just played King H8. And then we see bishop E6. Look at these amazing bishops. This one here and this one here. The two bishops working really well together. And white has very, very serious pin, in particular on F6 against the king here. The king is unfortunately placed, staring at this bishop. Black tries bishop A6. The rook just moves. And there's serious threats of just simply bishop takes D7 and rook E6 to mount pressure on F6 here. Black tries knight E5 to try and blunt this bishop to get rid of white's bishop. White wants to preserve this amazing asset, this dark square bishop. And there are numerous moves actually which are crushing here. Actually, it's just so good, white's position. All sorts of moves are just really, really good here. White simply plays F4. It's clearing knight out of the way. Let's have a look. If knight G4, then we just take that knight. That's not a move. So where can the knight go? If knight D3, then the knight's a little bit loose actually, and just bishop D4 followed by queen C3 is good for mounting pressure here. Or, like in the game, there's another way of exploiting the pin, which we'll have a look now. Knight D3 was played, And in this position, okay, it looks as though, is this a small blunder, giving up the exchange? We've got this huge trump card here. It doesn't really matter. Alexander Alekhine just takes that exchange sack, because what can we do now with this huge trump card? Can you see a really strong move using that diagonal? If I give you 10 seconds here. White to play. Okay, just G4. G4, just threatening G5. Really crushing. And the torture wouldn't even have to end there. Black resigned here, but let's have a quick look. If the bishop dropped back, G5, do we have to take immediately? Let's say H6. We can just play Queen C3. We don't even have to take on F6. Or just this is sufficient anyway. Even this position is really quite crushing. We'll just take here, check. It's all falling through. Taking here, everything's dropping off. So this game, after G4, Black just resigned. It showed a logical consequence really from the opening. Well, a horrible consequence of the opening when Black had given up the bishop on D2 right from the opening. How this dark square bishop was playing a major role. And the dynamic play of White, you know, the pawn sacrifice, the bishop sacrifice, really celebrated this bishop across that diagonal. I hope you enjoyed that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.